The wind carried the scent of dry mesquite and dust across the wide Arizona plain. The sun hung low, a heavy orange coin sinking into the jagged horizon. Somewhere far off, a coyote called, its lonely cry echoing through the quiet land that had seen too much blood and too many broken promises. A rider approached from the south, his horse weary, its sides caked with red earth. He rode like a man who had nowhere left to go. But something in his eyes said he was still searching for forgiveness, for peace. Or maybe for a ghost he couldn't let go of. The land stretched endless before him. The ruins of an old mission stood not far from the riverbed. Its adobe walls cracked and sun-bleached, like the bones of a forgotten dream. Inside those walls, a woman hid from the world. Her dress, once white, was now stained from days of dust and fear. Her hands rested over her belly as if guarding the fragile heartbeat within. Every creak of the wind against the warped shutters made her flinch. She had been running for days. Ever since the smoke rose from the fort and the sound of rifles shattered the quiet, she wasn't supposed to be here, alone among strangers and ghosts. But the frontier had a way of swallowing plans whole. Her husband had gone missing 2 weeks ago, gone to trade for supplies and never come back. Some said the Apache had taken him. Others whispered about bandits or deserters. She didn't know what to believe anymore. All she knew was that the nights were getting colder. The food was nearly gone, and the life inside her stirred restlessly, as if it too could sense the danger closing in. That evening, as twilight bled into the canyon and shadows stretched long across the dirt, she heard hooves, slow, careful, not the gallop of soldiers or the clatter of wagons. Just one rider, moving like a ghost. She stepped to the window and froze. A tall figure dismounted and walked toward the mission gate. He wore a blanket over his shoulders, his dark hair braided, his face painted faintly with clay. An Apache. Her breath caught in her throat. She backed away, pressing herself against the wall. Every story she'd ever heard came rushing back. Raids, scalps, ambushes. But when the man stepped through the open doorway, there was no weapon in his hand. He stopped a few feet from her, his gaze steady but unreadable. "You are hurt," he said quietly, his voice rough with dust. She shook her head, clutching her belly, as if that alone would protect her. "Please don't come any closer," she whispered. The Apache looked at her a long time, his expression softening. Then he slowly lowered himself to one knee in front of her. The gesture startled her. It felt sacred somehow, almost reverent. He placed his palm flat against the dirt floor and spoke again, not in English this time, but in the deep, rolling syllables of his people. When he looked up, his eyes were steady. "I swear my life to you," he said. Her heart hammered in her chest. "Why? You don't even know me." He tilted his head slightly, his gaze never leaving her. "I saw the flames by the river. Soldiers burned my camp. My wife and my son. They are gone. You are with child. You need protection. That is reason enough." The words hit her like a wave. There was sorrow in his tone that couldn't be faked. For a moment, the space between them filled with something fragile and human grief, recognizing grief. Still, she didn't know if she could trust him. The frontier didn't offer that luxury easily. "I don't need your pity," she said quietly, her voice trembling despite her attempt to sound firm. "It is not pity," he replied. "It is promise." She didn't answer. The wind pushed through the cracks in the old mission walls, stirring the dust at their feet. The Apache stayed kneeling, waiting for her permission to rise. She finally nodded, unsure why. He stood slowly like a man in prayer and moved toward the fire pit to rekindle the coals. His movements were calm, deliberate, almost respectful, as though he didn't want to startle her. When he spoke again, his tone was low. "You should eat. The night will be long. I have nothing left," she admitted. He reached into the satchel slung over his shoulder and pulled out strips of dried meat. She hesitated before taking them, her hands shaking. He didn't look at her as she ate, and somehow that made it easier. The silence between them stretched, filled only by the soft crackle of fire and the distant cry of an owl. Later that night, as the stars spilled across the black sky, she finally asked, "What's your name?" He paused before answering. "Toa," she nodded, I'm just trying to survive, Tawa. He looked toward the darkness beyond the broken doorway. So am I. The next morning, she woke to find him gone. Panic clawed through her until she saw him returning from the hills. Carrying a bundle of firewood and a small clay jar of water, he placed them by the fire without a word. She noticed then that his arm was bleeding, a deep cut near the shoulder. "You're hurt," she said. "It is nothing." "Let me help," she insisted. He seemed surprised but didn't refuse. She tore a strip from her dress and wrapped his wound. His skin was warm beneath her fingers, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. When she looked up, his eyes were on her steady, searching, but not unkind. That was when she whispered, "Please don't look at me like that." He didn't answer. Instead, he knelt again, as he had the night before, and pressed his hand to his chest. "I said I would protect you. That is my word. You will not be alone." The days that followed blurred together in a strange rhythm. They built a fragile peace within the crumbling walls of that mission. She would gather herbs from the riverbank while he hunted or repaired the old gate. Sometimes they spoke. Other times, silence said what words could not. Though they were from different worlds, the loneliness they carried seemed to bridge the distance, but peace never lasted long in that land. One morning, while she was grinding corn by the fire, Tawa froze suddenly. His head turned toward the canyon. He had the stillness of a hunter, the kind that senses danger before it arrives. "What is it?" she whispered. He didn't answer at first. Then he said quietly, "Riders?" Her pulse quickened. "Soldiers." He nodded once. "They follow tracks. Yours. Maybe mine." She stood, fear twisting her stomach. "They'll kill you." Tawa looked at her, calm even in the face of death. "They will not touch you." Before she could speak again, the sound of hooves thundered across the plain. Dust rose beyond the mission walls. Tawa moved quickly, taking up his bow and the knife at his side. He turned to her and said, "Hide by the well. Do not come out until I call." "No," she said, her voice cracking. "You can't fight them alone." He gave her a faint, almost sad smile. A man who has already lost everything has nothing left to fear. The sound of shouting grew louder, English voices, commanding, angry. She backed toward the corner, trembling, one hand gripping her swollen belly. Tawa stepped into the sunlight, standing tall before the ruined gate. His shadow stretched long behind him, merging with hers in the dust. The first soldier appeared over the rise, rifle glinting in the light. Then another, and another. She could hear their captain yelling orders, but she couldn't move. The air was thick with tension, the kind that comes before thunder or blood. Tawa raised his hand, calling out in a voice that carried across the plain, "No fight. There is woman here, she carries life." But the soldiers didn't stop. The captain shouted something she couldn't hear. The rifle bolts clicked into place. Tuan took one slow step forward. His hand rested lightly on the knife at his waist, though his eyes never left the woman's face inside the doorway. For an instant, time seemed to hold its breath, and then the first shot rang out. The echo rolled across the desert, scattering the birds from the cliffs. She screamed his name, the sound lost in the gunfire. Dust and smoke filled the air, and somewhere amid the chaos, Tawa's figure disappeared into the haze. When silence finally fell, the sun was high and merciless. The mission stood still again, its broken walls whispering with wind. She pressed her hand to her heart, trembling, waiting, hoping that he would still rise. But the dust kept moving, and the only answer was the cry of a lone hawk circling above. The frontier was not a place for promises. Yet somehow in that silent moment, she knew his vow would not be forgotten. The sun hung like fire over the canyon, and the air was heavy with dust and silence. She stood frozen by the old mission wall, her breath uneven, her heart hammering against her ribs. The gunfire still echoed faintly in her mind, though the desert had already swallowed its sound. The smell of smoke lingered, sharp and bitter, mixed with the iron scent of fear. She didn't know how long she stood there before her trembling legs carried her forward, toward the gate where Tawa had disappeared. The ground was torn with hoofprints, scattered shells, and dark stains that made her stomach turn. She called out his name, her voice raw, but only the wind answered. Somewhere nearby, a vulture circled, its shadow slipping across the sand. Her throat tightened. She could not find his body. Only a trail of disturbed earth leading toward the hills. It looked as if he had been dragged or had crawled away. She didn't know which thought frightened her more. Her body ached, her hands shaking as she gathered what she could from the ruined mission, some cornmeal. A canteen, a knife Tawa had left behind. She wrapped them in a piece of cloth and followed the trail toward the rocks. Each step felt heavier, her breath coming in gasps. The land stretched endless before her, heat shimmering off the stones like glass. She thought of turning back, of hiding. But the thought of leaving him, alone out there, made something deep inside her twist with guilt. She found him just before sundown, half hidden in a dry wash between two ridges. His breathing was shallow, his skin pale beneath the streaks of dirt and blood. He had taken a bullet through the side. Somehow, he was still alive. She knelt beside him, pressing her hands against the wound, whispering his name until his eyes fluttered open. For a long moment they just looked at each other, the world narrowing to the sound of their breath. "You should have stayed hidden," he murmured, "and let you die out here." She replied, her voice breaking. "You saved me once. Let me do the same." He tried to smile but winced instead. "If you stay, they will come back. Then we'll move before they do." She helped him sit up, though it took nearly all her strength. Every step back toward the mission was a struggle, the desert closing around them in waves of heat. When they finally reached the broken walls, she eased him onto the ground by the fire pit. The flames were weak but steady, flickering against the cracked adobe. For 2 days, she cared for him as best she could. She cleaned the wound, fed him bits of broth, and stayed awake through the long nights, listening for riders. Sometimes he drifted in and out of consciousness, speaking in his own tongue, calling names she didn't understand. Other times he stared into the flames, silent, his expression unreadable. On the third night, when the wind turned cold, he finally spoke again. "You are brave," he said softly. "Too brave for this land?" She shook her head. "No, I'm just tired of running." He studied her a moment, then said, "Tell me what brought you here." She hesitated, unsure if she could bear to speak it aloud. But something in his eyes, and still made her trust him. "We came west last spring. My husband said there was work building the new line through the valley. He was a kind man, or at least I thought he was. But the farther we went, the more the land changed him. He started drinking, gambling. Then one morning he left to find work at the fort, and he never came back." Tawa listened quietly. "You searched for him?" "For weeks," she said. "They told me he'd been caught stealing rations. Some said he was hanged. Others said he ran off with another woman. I stopped asking after a while. I just wanted to keep the baby safe." The fire crackled between them. Tawa's face was hard to read, but there was no judgment in his eyes. "This land takes more than it gives," he said. "But sometimes it still gives what we do not expect." His words lingered in her mind long after he fell asleep. She watched the flames dance in the dark, wondering what it was she had found here, kindness, fate, or something that could never last. The next morning, the sound of distant drums carried through the air. She rose quickly, stepping outside the mission walls. To the west, faint trails of smoke rose from the canyon. Apache fires, she guessed. Maybe others had survived the raid Tawa spoke of. When she told him, he pushed himself up, wincing. "My people," he said quietly. "They are close. You can go to them," she said. "They'll help you heal." He looked at her with a strange mix of gratitude and sadness. "If I go, they will not trust you. They will see only a woman of the soldiers. They will think I have betrayed them. Then what will you do?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked toward the horizon, his expression distant. "There is a place in the mountains, a cave, by the red cliffs. My father took me there when I was a boy. It is hidden, safe. We can go there until you are strong." She hesitated. You cannot stay here," he said. "The soldiers will come again." She wanted to argue, but deep down, she knew he was right. The mission was no refuge anymore, just a ruin filled with ghosts. So she helped him pack what little they had, and by dusk, they left the only shelter they knew. The journey was slow. The desert stretched before them in waves of pale gold and rust, every mile marked by heat and exhaustion. Tawa leaned heavily on a staff, his wound reopening more than once, but he refused to stop. She followed beside him, her steps careful, her hands often resting protectively over her belly. They spoke little, but the silence between them was not empty. It was heavy with unspoken questions of trust, of fate, of what would happen when the world caught up to them again. As night fell, they reached a ridge overlooking a valley blanketed in moonlight. From up there, the land seemed endless, its emptiness both beautiful and cruel. She looked at Tawa, wondering how a man who had lost everything could still walk with such quiet strength. "Do you ever hate them?" she asked suddenly. "The soldiers, the settlers, the people who took your family?" He was silent for a long time before answering. "Hate burns too hot. It leaves nothing alive. But you fight them." "I fight for what is left," he said simply. "Not for hate, for memory." His words sank deep, and she found herself staring out into the night, wondering what memories she was still fighting for. A husband who had vanished, a home that never was, a child who would soon enter a world with more ghosts than mercy. When dawn came, they continued north toward the red cliffs. Each day the air grew thinner, cooler. They crossed dry riverbeds and canyons carved like scars across the earth. Sometimes they found the remains of camps, long abandoned ashes, broken arrows, rusted tins. Once, she spotted a small wooden cross half buried in the dirt. She said a quiet prayer, though she didn't know for whom. One evening, as they neared the foothills, they came upon the ruins of a burned wagon. The ground was littered with torn canvas, shattered glass, and scattered bones. The woman froze when she saw a locket half buried in the ash. She picked it up and opened it with trembling fingers. Inside was a faded sketch of a man with kind eyes. Her husband, her throat went dry. Tawa stepped beside her, his expression tightening. "This was your wagon?" he asked. She nodded slowly. "I think it was." She felt her knees give way, and he caught her before she fell. For a moment, the world spun. Everything she had run from, all the fear and doubt, came crashing back. Her husband hadn't left her. He had died here, in the same kind of fire that had destroyed Tawa's home. The discovery broke something inside her. ... But it also hardened something else. When she looked up again, her eyes were wet but steady. "I don't want to run anymore," she said. Toy looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. "Then we will not run. But we must keep moving." They buried the locket under a pile of stones before leaving. The road ahead was steep, leading into the red cliffs that glowed beneath the dying sun. As they climbed, thunder rolled in the distance, and dark clouds gathered over the valley. By the time they reached the cave, the storm was close. Lightning flashed over the ridges, painting the world in brief silver light. Inside the cave, they found dry ground and the faint smell of old smoke. As if others had once taken shelter there as the rain poured outside, she sat near the mouth of the cave, staring into the storm. The sound of thunder mixed with the beat of her heart. Tawa rested against the wall, pale but awake. He spoke softly. "This storm will pass," she nodded. "Maybe, but something tells me the next one won't be made of rain." He looked at her then, and for the first time, she saw the same fear in his eyes that lived in her own. Somewhere in the distance, through the rumble of thunder, came another sound, faint but unmistakable. The distant echo of gunfire. Neither of them spoke again. The desert held its breath, waiting for what would come next. The rain poured through the night, strumming against the rock like 1,000 heartbeats. The cave flickered with the light of a small fire, and the air smelled of wet earth and smoke. The woman sat close to the flames, her shawl pulled tight around her shoulders. The baby stirred within her, kicking softly as if sensing her fear. Outside, the storm rolled across the canyon, swallowing the sound of distant gunfire, but not erasing it. Toa sat near the entrance, one hand pressed against his side. The wound had reopened during their climb, but he didn't complain. His eyes stayed fixed on the dark mouth of the valley below, watching the flashes of light far off where the soldiers were likely searching. Every so often, he would lift his head slightly, listening. His instincts were too sharp to ignore. "They are hunting," he said finally, voice low. "The sound carries. They are not far." She swallowed hard. "How do you know it's them?" "Soldiers do not ride in storms unless they chase something," he answered. "Or someone." The fire crackled between them, throwing long shadows on the walls. The woman looked at him, her face pale in the firelight. "If they find us here, they'll kill you. Maybe me too." He turned toward her slowly, his eyes dark and calm. "Then they must not find us." "But where would we go?" she asked. "The river's flooded, the hills are too steep, and you can barely stand." He didn't answer, only looked back toward the valley. The silence between them stretched, heavy with unspoken fear. She felt anger rise inside her, not at him, but at the world that had turned survival into a kind of punishment. When the rain eased near dawn, the storm left behind a sky washed clean but gray. The air was cold, the kind that bites the lungs. Tawa packed what little food remained and wrapped his wound again. He moved slowly, every motion deliberate. She could see how much pain he was hiding, but he refused to show weakness. They left the cave when the first light touched the cliffs. The ground was slick with mud, the rocks shining wet. Below them, the valley stretched wide and empty, though faint trails of smoke still rose in the distance. The woman followed Tawa's lead as they climbed higher along the ridge. By midday, they reached a narrow plateau covered in cedar and sagebrush. From there, the land opened into a canyon filled with boulders and broken trees. Tawa stopped and knelt beside a patch of dirt, brushing it with his fingers. "Tracks," he said quietly. "Horses. 4, maybe 5. Her stomach twisted. "Soldiers. Not soldiers," he said after a pause. "Scouts. Apache." She stared at him, unsure whether to feel relief or fear. "Your people," he nodded. "Maybe what is left of them. Then we should find them," she said quickly. "They can help." Tawa's expression hardened. "They will not welcome me." "Why?" He looked away, the muscles in his jaw tightening. "Because I stood before you that night and swore my life. To them, that is betrayal. They will not see the promise, only the woman it was made to." The words stung more than she expected. She didn't want to be the reason he lost his place among his people, but she also knew there was no going back. Whatever had started between them was bound by something larger than choice. They moved on carefully, staying close to the rocks. The canyon air was thin, and the sound of trickling water echoed faintly from below. Every rustle made her heart race. Once a hawk passed overhead, circling before disappearing behind a cliff as night approached. They found shelter beneath an overhang of stone. The fire they built was small, barely enough to keep warm. The woman leaned against the wall, exhaustion settling into her bones. Her feet ached, her back throbbed, but she said nothing. Tawa sat nearby, his eyes fixed on the flames. He seemed far away, lost in thought. She watched him for a while before asking, "You said they burned your camp. Why?" He hesitated before answering. "We had a treaty with the settlers by the river. For a time there was peace. But peace is only good until someone wants more land. A trader came one morning, offering rifles for cattle. My brother refused. That night, soldiers came with torches. He stopped speaking, his hand tightening into a fist. She didn't push him to continue. She could see the pain in his face, the kind that lived deep and didn't fade with time. After a long pause, he said quietly, "You ask why I swore my life to you? It is because when I saw you in that mission, I remembered my wife standing in the firelight holding our son. You looked the same. Afraid, but strong. I could not let that memory die again." Her throat tightened. She didn't know what to say. The silence that followed was heavy, but full of meaning. In the stillness, their pain felt shared to lives broken in different ways, crossing in a place neither belonged. That night, she dreamed of fire. Flames crawling over dry grass, smoke choking the sky, Tawa's voice calling out in the distance. She woke to find him gone. Panic seized her, but then she saw movement near the canyon edge. He was standing there, bow in hand, scanning the horizon. "What are you looking for?" she asked, her voice hoarse. "Tracks again," he said. "Someone has been watching us." Her pulse quickened. "The soldiers." "Maybe," he said, "or maybe not." The tension hung thick. They packed quickly and started moving east, toward the ridge. The path was narrow, flanked by sharp stones and thorny brush. Halfway up, she heard the faint crack of a branch behind them. Tawa spun around, bow raised. A shadow slipped between the rocks below. Then another. "Keep walking," he whispered. They climbed faster, breath ragged, hearts pounding. A voice called out from below, harsh and unfamiliar. Then another voice answered, this one in Apache. Tawa froze, his expression unreadable. "It's them," he said. "My people." "Then they'll help us," she said, trying to catch her breath. He shook his head slowly. "They will want to know why I travel with you. If they believe I have betrayed them, they may kill us both." Before she could reply, the sound of footsteps grew closer. 3 riders emerged from the shadows, their faces painted with ash and ochre. The leader, a tall man with a scar down his cheek, raised his hand. "Tawa," he said in Apache, "you are far from your place." Tawa lowered his bow, but didn't move closer. "There is no place left," he replied. The man's gaze shifted to the woman, then back to Tawa. His expression darkened. "You bring her here?" "After what they did. She carries life," Tawa said. "She is under my protection." The man's jaw tightened. "You forget what protection costs." Tawa stood tall despite his wound. "I forget nothing." The exchange was tense, their words like blades drawn but not yet struck. The woman didn't understand their language, but she could feel the hostility in the air. The other 2 riders muttered to each other, glancing at her with suspicion. Finally, the leader spoke in broken English. "You come with us. Our chief will decide." Tawa hesitated, then nodded. "We will go." The journey that followed was silent and uneasy. They were led through winding canyons to a hidden camp by a river bank. Smoke rose from small fires, and the smell of roasting meat drifted through the air. Children played near the tents, their laughter faint under the watchful eyes of elders. But when the woman entered, all sounds seemed to stop. Dozens of eyes turned toward her, curious, cold, wary. She felt her skin prickle under their gaze. The people murmured among themselves, their words sharp and quick. Tawa walked beside her, his posture straight, his face calm. But she could sense the tension in him. They were brought before the chief, an old man with eyes like flint and a voice that carried even when quiet. He looked at Tawa first, then at her. "You bring a woman of the white soldiers into our camp," he said. "Tell me why I should not end you where you stand." Tawa bowed his head slightly. "Because she is not them. She has lost what I have lost. Her husband was killed by the same men who burned our homes. Her child will be born in this land. She deserves a chance to live." The chief studied them for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he said, "If what you say is true, you will prove it. The soldiers come from the south. They have taken one of our own. Bring him back. Then we will speak of mercy." Tawa nodded without hesitation. "I will go." The woman stepped forward, her voice trembling. "Then I go too." The camp fell silent. Even Tawa looked at her in surprise. "You cannot," he said. "It is too dangerous." "I won't hide again," she said. "Not while you fight for me." The chief's eyes narrowed. "Then you both will go. If you return, we will decide what is to be done." As the sun set over the canyon, they prepared to leave once more. The desert stretched ahead, wide and merciless. The soldiers were somewhere beyond those ridges. And the life growing inside her kicked softly, as if reminding her of what was at stake. Tawa tightened the strap on his bow, glanced at her and said quietly, "Whatever happens, we move together." The wind rose, carrying the scent of smoke and rain. Far in the distance, the faint crack of a rifle echoed once again through the valley. The hunt had begun, but neither of them knew who was hunting who. The night was cold, sharper than before, and the sky hung low with clouds that looked like smoke. The woman followed Tawa through the narrow canyon trail, their footsteps soft in the sand. They had left the Apache camp under the weight of many eyes, each glance filled with doubt and mistrust. The chief's words still echoed in her mind if they returned with the captive. They might earn their place among his people, but if they failed, they would be forgotten by both sides. The wind carried the scent of pine and ash. Somewhere far off, an owl called, its cry stretching across the canyon. The woman tightened her shawl, glancing at Tawa's silhouette ahead. His steps were steady, even though she knew his wound still pained him. He carried his bow over his shoulder and the knife at his belt, his eyes fixed on the faint light of dawn just beginning to touch the ridges. How far to the fort? She whispered. Tawa didn't turn around. A day's walk, maybe less if we move before the sun rises. They keep prisoners by the river, near the old cottonwoods. You think he's still alive? If they need him for answers, yes, Tawa said. His voice was calm, but she could hear something beneath it, anger, or maybe the weight of memory. The soldiers do not give mercy easily. They stopped when the path opened into a valley filled with pale grass and scattered rocks. The woman crouched behind a boulder, watching the horizon where smoke rose faintly in the distance. That's them? Tawa nodded. The fort. But look, their tracks. Fresh ones. He knelt, brushing the dirt with his fingers. Riders, maybe 6. They passed through only hours ago. Scouts? He looked up, meeting her eyes. Hunters. Her stomach tightened. They're looking for us. Or for him, he said quietly. Either way, we must move before they circle back. They crossed the valley in silence, their movements careful and slow. The sun climbed higher and the air grew hot. Dust clung to their skin, and the woman's feet burned through her worn shoes. Several times she wanted to stop, but Tawa's voice guided her forward, steady and sure. When they reached the ridge overlooking the river, they stopped again. Below them, the land sloped into a flat stretch of scrub and thin trees. The fort stood beyond the water, its wooden walls sharp against the horizon. 2 guards moved along the perimeter, their rifles glinting in the light. Tawa crouched low, studying the ground. We wait until dark. Then we move, she nodded, sinking against the rocks, her body heavy with exhaustion. The baby shifted again, restless. She placed a hand on her belly, feeling the faint rhythm beneath her palm. Each kick reminded her why she couldn't stop now. Hours passed. The heat gave way to a dry chill as the sun began to fade. Shadows lengthened, stretching over the ground like fingers. When the first stars appeared, Tawa signaled for her to follow. They crept down toward the river, keeping to the brush. The sound of frogs and crickets covered their movements. At the edge of the water, Tawa turned to her. You stay here, he said softly. If I do not return before the moon is high, you go back to the canyon.
Ow.
She whispered. We came together. We leave together. His eyes softened, though his face remained stern. You are brave, but this place will not forgive mistakes. I must go alone. She shook her head. You'll need someone to cover you if they spot you. I can shoot. You've seen me. Studied her for a moment, then nodded. If you see trouble, fire once. I will come to you. He slipped into the shadows, silent as smoke. She crouched behind a tree, gripping the rifle he'd given her days earlier. The fort loomed in the distance, its lanterns glowing faintly against the dark. She could see movement by the gate's figures passing, voices low. Time stretched painfully slow. Every sound made her heart pound, minutes turned to hours. The moon climbed high, casting a pale light across the river. Then, faintly, she saw him, a figure moving along the outer fence, crouched low. He cut through the wire, slipped inside, and disappeared. She waited. Her hands trembled. The night seemed endless. Then came the sound, sharp, sudden. A shout. A gunshot. She flinched, heart leaping. More voices followed, urgent and loud. Lanterns swung wildly across the fort walls. The woman gripped the rifle tighter, eyes fixed on the shadows. She wanted to run, but fear held her still, through the smoke and confusion. She saw two figures break free near the back gate, one running, the other half-dragged. It was Tawa, his arm around another man's shoulders. Soldiers poured out behind them, shouting orders. She raised the rifle, took a breath, and fired toward the lights. The shot cracked through the night, and one of the soldiers dropped. The others scattered, yelling. Tawa glanced toward the sound, saw her, and waved. "Go," he shouted. She ran toward them as bullets tore through the air, the sound splitting the darkness. The man Tawa carried stumbled, but kept moving. They reached the riverbank, splashing through the shallow water. The cold bit her legs, but she didn't stop. When they reached the far side, Tawa pushed the wounded man ahead. "Keep going," he said, breathless. She turned back, just as another shot rang out. Tawa staggered. "No," she cried, running toward him, but he waved her off. "I'm fine," he said, though blood darkened his sleeve. "Keep moving." They climbed the ridge, gasping for breath. Behind them, the fort lights burned bright, and the sound of horses carried through the night. The rescued man collapsed once they reached the cover of trees. His face was pale, his hands bound and bruised. They were going to hang me," he gasped. Ta knelt beside him. "You are safe now," he said. The man's eyes darted to the woman, confusion flashing across his face. "Who are you?" "Just someone trying to survive," she said. They didn't rest long. The sound of pursuit was too close. Tawa guided them deeper into the canyons, his steps slow but sure. The rescued man, called Chaska, as he later told them, was one of the Apache scouts captured after the fort raid. His presence now meant hope, but also danger. "They will come for me," Chaska said quietly as they walked. "They do not leave what they claim. We'll be gone before dawn," Tawa said. But the woman could tell he was weakening. The blood on his arm had not stopped. His steps grew uneven. She moved closer, steadying him when he stumbled. By sunrise, they reached a narrow gorge surrounded by red stone. A small creek ran through it, and the air smelled of wet clay. They stopped there to rest. Tawa leaned against the rock, his breathing shallow. She tore a strip of cloth and wrapped his arm again. "You need to stop moving," she said. "You'll bleed to death if you don't," he smiled faintly. "Not yet." Chaska kept watch near the edge of the gorge, scanning the horizon. "They are coming," he said suddenly. "How many?" Tawa asked. "Too many." The woman's stomach turned cold. "We can't outrun them." Tawa's gaze drifted to the cliffs. "Then we do not run." He pushed himself to his feet, wincing but resolute. "We make our stand here." She stared at him. "You can't fight them all. You can hold them long enough," he said. "Long enough for you to get him back to the camp." "I'm not leaving you," she said fiercely. Tawa's eyes softened, but there was no hesitation in his voice. "You must. The child will need you. The world may not give mercy, but life still finds a way." She shook her head, tears filling her eyes. "You swore your life to protect me. Let me return that promise." For a moment neither spoke. The air between them felt alive with all the things they hadn't said. Then, from the ridge above, came the sharp whistle of a bullet cutting through air. It struck the rock beside them, spraying dust. Chaska fired back, shouting for cover. The echo rolled through the canyon, loud and final. The soldiers had found them. Tawa pulled the woman toward the creek. "Go," he shouted. "Get to the shadows." Gunfire erupted again, flashes of light against the cliffs. Chaska fired from behind a boulder, reloading fast. Tawa returned fire with his bow, arrows slicing through the smoke. The woman crouched behind the rocks, clutching the rifle, her heart racing. The sound of hoofbeats drew closer. Voices shouted orders. The air filled with the bitter smell of gunpowder. Toya moved from cover to cover, drawing their fire away from her. The sun broke through the clouds, lighting the red stone like fire. She saw him pause to notch another arrow and then saw the captain from the fort riding into view. The man's uniform was torn, his face marked with rage. There he is, the captain roared. Take him alive. Tawa fired again, striking one of the riders. Another arrow flew, another man fell. The soldiers dismounted, fanning out across the rocks. The woman fired once. Twice, the rifle jerking against her shoulder. A soldier fell, but more replaced him. Chaska shouted something in Apache, his voice fierce. The world became chaos gunfire, shouts the clash of men and stone. She saw Tawa lunge forward, knife flashing in the sunlight. Then came another shot, louder than the rest. He stumbled, falling to one knee. No, she screamed, rushing toward him through the dust. The baby kicked hard inside her as if it too could feel the terror. Tawa looked up at her, his eyes full of something unspoken, fear, love, or fate itself. He reached for his knife again, pushing himself to his feet as the soldiers closed in. Behind them, the captain raised his pistol. Taking aim, the woman lifted her rifle with shaking hands. The air went still, and then the shot rang out. The sound of the shot echoed through the canyon and faded into the wind. Dust hung in the air like smoke, and for a long moment no one moved. Then the captain's pistol slipped from his hand, clattering against the rocks. He staggered backward and fell, a dark stain spreading across his chest. The woman stood frozen, the rifle still raised, her breath catching in her throat. She hadn't meant to kill him, not really, but her finger had pulled the trigger before her mind could stop it. The world around her went silent except for the faint rush of the river below. Twade was still on his knees, his blood soaking into the dirt. When she dropped beside him, he tried to speak, but the words came out in a whisper. You saved me. She shook her head quickly. You saved me first. Chaska was beside them, checking the captain's men who were now retreating into the distance. The last few soldiers, realizing their leader had fallen, mounted their horses and fled. None dared look back. The fight was over, but the cost hung heavy in the air. Tawa's head rested against her lap, his skin pale from blood loss. The woman tore another strip from her shawl, pressing it against the wound in his side. Stay with me, she said. Please. His breathing was shallow, but his eyes were steady. You must go. The others will return. Take Chaska and run north. No, she said fiercely, shaking her head. We're going together. You promised you wouldn't leave me, gave a weak smile. I keep my word. I will walk as far as I can. Chaska moved to help him up, his expression tight with grief. They lifted Tawa between them, and the three made their way down toward the creek where the water ran cold and clean. The woman washed the blood from her hands and from Tawa's wound. The red swirled away downstream like a fading shadow. They followed the river north for hours, keeping to the cover of trees. The sky dimmed into twilight, the colors soft and tired. Every step felt heavier than the last. By the time they reached the base of a low ridge, Tawa could no longer walk. They built a small fire hidden under the overhang of rock. The flames flickered weakly, casting a pale glow across his face. The woman sat close, holding his hand. The baby inside her shifted again, as if restless under the quiet. You said once that the land remembers, she whispered. Do you think it will remember us? Tawa's eyes lifted to the darkening sky. The land forgets names, but it keeps the story. The wind will tell it. The trees will keep the sound. Chaska sat across the fire, his gaze steady. Your story will not fade, he said softly. I will carry it to our people. They will know you fought for what was right. The woman wanted to believe that. She wanted to believe that this struggle, the loss, the fear, the pain had meant something. But as she looked down at Tawa, his breath coming slower, her heart ached with the truth that not all stories end in triumph. Some end quietly, like a fading song. Hours passed. The fire burned low, and the cold crept in again. Tawa stirred once more, his hand brushing against her belly. Your child, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. He will be born under free skies. Promise me that, she nodded, tears sliding down her cheeks. I promise, he smiled faintly, his fingers tightening around hers. Then I can rest. The night stretched on, and when the first light of dawn touched the ridge, he was still. The woman sat beside him, her hand resting on his, the fire long gone cold. Chaska stood a few paces away, his head bowed. Neither spoke. Words would have been too small for what they felt. They buried him near the river where the earth was soft and the wind carried the scent of pine. She marked the place with a smooth stone and a strip of red cloth torn from his sash. As she stood there, she felt the baby move again, stronger this time, as if reminding her that life was still waiting ahead. Chaska placed a hand on her shoulder. "The fort will not come this far," he said, "but we must move before the next patrol." She turned toward him, her face pale but resolute. "Then we go to your people. They should know what happened here," he nodded. "They will honor him, and they will protect you." The days that followed blurred together. The land shifted from red rock to rolling plains, from canyon walls to open sky. The woman grew quieter as they traveled, her thoughts heavy with memory. Sometimes, when the wind moved just right, she thought she heard Tawa's voice in it, a calm whisper that reminded her to keep walking. By the time they reached the Apache camp, the world felt different. The war between the settlers and the tribes was still burning. But here, in this small valley tucked between the hills, there was peace. The people came to meet them with cautious eyes, but when Chaska told them what had happened, their silence turned to respect. The elder woman who led the camp took the pregnant woman into her care. She was kind but firm, guiding her to rest and eat. "You have carried sorrow," the elder said. "Now you must carry life." Weeks passed. The nights were filled with stories told by the fire tales of courage, of loss, of how even the harshest land could nurture hope. Chaska kept his promise and spoke often of Towa, the warrior who gave his life to save a stranger and her unborn child. Each time he told the story, the children would sit close, his eyes wide with wonder. When the child was finally born, the first cry rose into the cool night air like a song. The woman held him close, his small body warm against her chest. The elder smiled. "He carries the strength of two worlds," she said. "He will walk with both, and maybe one day they will not be enemies." The woman named him after the word Tawa had once spoken something that meant light from the dawn. It felt right, as though the world itself had whispered it to her. Seasons turned. The valley bloomed with green, then faded into gold again. The child grew fast, his eyes bright like the sky after rain. He would often wander to the river where the stone marker still stood, touching it with small hands as if trying to understand what it meant. Sometimes, at sunset, the woman would sit there too, watching the light move across the water. She would think of the promise she made the one to raise her child under open skies, and she would whisper thanks to the land that had carried them this far. The war beyond the valley raged for years, but its echoes grew fainter with time. The settlers pushed west, the soldiers moved on, and the old ways bent, but did not break. The story of the Apache who knelt before the woman spread quietly across towns and camps, told in hushed voices by those who had heard it secondhand. Some called it a legend, others a truth softened by retelling. But for the woman, it was neither, it was memory. One morning, when her son was old enough to walk beside her, they climbed the ridge that overlooked the plains. The horizon stretched wide, endless and golden. She took his hand and pointed toward the distant line where the land met the sky. "That is where your father swore his life," she said. "Not to fight or to conquer, but to protect what was good. Remember that, no matter where you go." The boy nodded, his small face solemn. "I will." The wind picked up, brushing through the grass like a sigh. For a moment, she could almost feel Tawa's presence beside her, quiet and strong. She didn't speak. She just stood there, her hand in her child's. The world around them vast and alive. As the sun climbed higher, they began the walk back to the valley, their shadows long and thin across the earth. The land had changed, but it still held their story, the story of a woman who found hope in the harshest place, and a man who gave everything for a promise he never broke. And in that wild, open silence of the American frontier, their memory lived on, carried by the wind, remembered by the earth that had seen it all. Top of form, bottom of form.